in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you, for you, for you, for
Welcome to Deception Detection Radio. I'm Kay.
And I'm Chad.
We pray you all had a blessed week. We're really excited to welcome back Derek Gilbert and Gary Wayne to Deception Detection Radio. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, so glad to be back.
It's been a while, Gary.
It's been a while, yeah. I've been looking forward to coming back and working with you and Chad again, and especially with Derek at the same time. I can't think of a better way to come back and do another show and guest with you today, so excited about it.
Oh, we've been excited about it, too, getting you both together. It's going to be an amazing evening. So let's go ahead and start out with the opening prayer. Derek, did you want to go ahead and start us out on that, please?
Sure, I'll jump in. Thank you. Father, we thank you for drawing us together and for making this technology possible, that we can connect over the many miles that separate us, but bringing us together over your word, which unites us and guides us, instructs us, and encourages us. Father, we pray as we speak that you'll grant us clarity of thought and word, grant us wisdom and discernment as we seek to understand better the nature of the war in which we live. Father, we know that you've already won the victory. The enemy is simply trying to cause as much damage as possible. And we pray, Father, that those who hear this may begin to understand the nature of this conflict and the gravity of the situation, that those who've not yet made a decision to accept Jesus Christ would be moved to do so, because of the fact that we are literally in a war for our eternal souls and those of our family members, our friends, our colleagues. Father, we pray that, again, you'll grant us clarity of thought and word as we speak. Help us as we speak not to add anything to your word or take anything away from it, but to speak only that which you would have us speak. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you, Derek.
My honor.
Well, I guess I'm going to be kicking this off, so I will go ahead and I know that we had talked a little bit about the Apkallu, and we've talked about the Anunnaki, the 70 gods of Psalms 82. I know that some Christians are familiar with the Book of Enoch and the 200 fallen angels, but one of the things that I've run across here lately on the research from the film that I've been working on with Justin, the Hollow Earth Chronicles, was when we interviewed Chief Joseph Riverwind, and he got into about the ant people and started talking about that their actual name was the Anunnaki. I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. That's one of those coincidences that you just, it's very, very, very hard to ignore. And then when you also look at the shape of the ant head, right, it is that sort of elongated look with that high cheekbone and those extended jaw bones. And it's very, very similar to descriptions of Anunnaki and Nephilim.
Exactly. And basically, I think you guys are pretty much, in agreement that these things are all pretty much talking about the same type of creatures and beings or entities, whatever you want to call them.
Well, sure, the enemy is going to reveal itself in different ways to different people across the ages, but the end result of the deception is always the same. Whether they present themselves as gods or extraterrestrials, the goal, the message is the same, which is that that they are our gods, and that what we as Christians believe is in error. And it's always an anti-Christian message. It's you don't often hear reports from UFO experiencers, contactees, or abductees that criticizes the beliefs of Hindus, Buddhists, or Muslims. It's always the God of the Bible.
It's amazing how consistent the messages always are, as well as the descriptions of these types of entities, and from all cultures, all ages, particularly into prehistory, that they're all describing the same type of fallen angel or God or alien type of being that all have the same religion, that all have the same sort of outlook. Just as Derek was saying, is always anti-Christian and always pro-Eastern mysticism or polytheism. But even the descriptions of the gods and the description of what they do for humankind, it's an amazingly identical story that is told all over the world, but always from a polytheist perspective.
Yeah, one of the things that Riverwind actually got into detail and was talking about was their ancestors said that their people came from the stars. They said that they came from the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, and said that they actually came down here, and that's basically how the giants were created here in the Americas.
Well, again, and the Pleiades is one of those common denominators in prehistory and with the flood story. Just as the Pleiades will show up in some verses in the Bible, as in, I think it's in Job and Amos and in the Psalms. But what's interesting about the Pleiades as well is it's also connected as the Seven Sisters and connected to Orion, which is also connected to the flood. And particularly in Native American mythologies, like from the Hopi and others, and from the Kishamaya, and from Atlantean mythologies, because they're all kind of connected back as you trace their religions and their history back to the white snake clam that comes out of the island in the Atlantic, is that they have this recollection of 2 or 3, depending on the legend or the religion, stars out of the Pleiades that hits the oceans, that starts the conflagration of catastrophes that leads to the flood event. And then when they have versions of the Babel story in polytheism after the flood, they build this temple at the bottom of the Babel Tower that's dedicated to Enki and whatever other vernacular name of the gods it might be in the other religions, and it's dedicated to both Enki and these 2 stars or asteroids or meteors, whatever they were, that begat the flood. So again, you have this connection that is inexplicable, all coming mostly from a polytheist account that is rarely sort of tried to be analyzed in terms of, okay, does the Bible say anything on that? And is there a correlation there that they're telling obviously the same story, but through a different lens?
Sorry about that. Couldn't find my button there for a second. But and like I said, it's very interesting how, this stuff is so interwoven and connected. Derek, do you mind jumping in and talking a little bit about your book, The Great Inception, where you talked about the mountains and these portals and the gods?
Well, Babel was the artificial mountain, but mountains in general play a key role in the narrative of the Bible. Mountains have been sacred all over the world for as long as humans have been walking this planet. And skeptics, secularists would say, well, it's just because primitive man was too simple to recognize that that wasn't where the gods lived. So our distant ancestors assumed that's where the gods lived because it was the mountaintops are remote, they're pristine, unsullied by the mundane toil of human hands. And so because of the best places, that's obviously where the gods must live. But I think it recalls a time when mankind actually did live on the mountain of God. The first mountain, holy mountain, or cosmic mountain, if you will, was Eden. Ezekiel 28 tells us that, yes, it was a garden, but it was a garden on God's holy mountain. And it was from that mountain that the rebel in Eden, also mentioned in Isaiah 14, was cast out. Isaiah 14 gets more specific there, and what happens next. The shades rose up to meet him, the shades being the Rephaim. It was I think, an attempt by the enemy, the fallen, who rebelled against God the Creator, to create another mountain that would replace God's holy mountain, would reign supreme in the cosmos. Isaiah 14 is pretty specific about that, and identifies the mountain, where it talks about the sides of the north, which is a phrase in Hebrew, and my pronunciation will butcher the words, but I'll give it a shot anyway. The Yarakat Zephon, that only appears in Scripture 3 times. Another one of those times is Ezekiel 38, where it's talking about the hordes of Gog and Magog coming from the uttermost heights of the north. Mount Zephon, which was so important to in the culture of Israel because of the influence of the god Baal or Baal. You actually, the word Zephon actually became the Hebrew word for the compass point north. But everyone in the ancient world knew that was the holy mountain of Baal, where his palace was located. So that's what Isaiah 14 identifies as the goal of this divine rebel who was kicked out of Eden, to establish Mount Zephon as the cosmic mountain, which I think argues for the identity of the entity in Eden to be the entity then that later represented itself to the ancient world as the storm god, whether you called him Baal, or by one of the other names it was known by. To the Greeks, it was Zeus. To the Romans, it was Jupiter. To the Hurrians, it was Teshub. To the Hittites, it was Tarhun. There a number of names, but the same entity apparently, all pointing to that entity and to that place, that mountain on the border between Turkey and Syria today called Jabal al-Aqra, as the place where this entity wanted to establish his throne and dominion over the earth to replace that of Yahweh. Babel was the artificial mountain that Nimrod wanted to use to create a locality for the abode of the gods. And this is according to a poem, a Sumerian poem that was rediscovered in the 19th century, translated. It mentions the Sumerian king Enmerkar, who, like Nimrod, was the second generation after the flood. The poem also mentions the confusion of language, and there's some scholars who disagree about that. Some interpret that poem as saying the confused languages were all made one tongue, but the odds of that particular episode, whether it's confusing the languages or unifying the languages, taking one and many languages and attaching it to the project to construct a temple, or to rebuild the temple of Enki, the god of the abyss, to create the abode of the gods, is beyond coincidental. So what you had at Babel was an attempt to create, if you want to use the word portal, I guess it's accurate. It was an opportunity. It was an attempt by mankind to force its way back into the divine council, the divine assembly, by creating an artificial mount of assembly, or mount of the congregation. That's what Babel was all about, and that's why God was compelled to personally intervene and put a stop to it. But that's what the whole of this rebellion is about between these small g gods and God, their creator, capital G God. It's about who is going to rule the Mount of Assembly, the mountain where the gods, small g gods, gather to serve the ruler, who of course is the creator of the universe, Yahweh, the God of the Bible. These small g gods want to overthrow their creator and rule in his place on their own Mount of Assembly. God has identified Zion as his holy mountain forever. That is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and that is where the final battle between good and evil, Armageddon, will be fought. That's why the subtitle of my book is called Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. It began on a mountain, it's going to end on a mountain, and the whole of history is about this struggle between God, the creator, and these small g gods who rebelled against his authority.
Yeah, and I'm going to underline and connect a few things in here from what Derek was just talking about, this idea of a holy mountain and whether or not it was one civilization before the flood, or as other religions and occult legends will talk about, as many as 4 to 7 to 9. Typically 7 tends to be more of the common denominator. They have that commonality of that holy mountain. They're known by different names around the world. You know, the Chinese have actually named the 7 mountains as part of their mythology. And so you have a mountain, let's say, that's in Greek mythology, that's Olympus. And of course, most people are familiar with Hermon, which not most, but a lot of people connect in some of the beliefs coming out of Mesopotamia. That is Mount Nippur, which was the Sumerian mountain, the holy congregation. You have Adiops, which was the Mount of Serpents, which was connected to Atlantis. And wherever you go around the world, you have that ideology of this assembly of this holy mountain. And again, I don't think that that's a coincidence, and I don't think it's a coincidence that humans were trying to build pyramids, whether it's Babel in a tower, and all the while noting that towers, ziggurats, and pyramids were thought of as the same type of structure in the antediluvian epoch and in the early post-diluvian epoch, that they were trying to create these holy mountains because this is where the gods came to meet. And they came from the other dimensions, whether through portals or however the gods move back and forth between the different dimensions, the spirit world and the physical world. But this was a place where they met the kings of the antediluvian epoch, or the ring lords, as it would be known in some more modern traditions. And so these were the Anunnaki. That comes out of the Anunnaki sort of version of it. And so anything that's circular, like a King Arthur's table or a ring lord or a ring, is always from that sort of tradition. And I think it's interesting that they're always trying to copycat or make a false replication of what God has set up. Even though they're fighting for a rebellion and probably being different and away from God and not following his rules, they're always trying to recreate this copycat version, aka Antichrist will come back as a copycat of or will come to us as a copycat of Jesus, just as the false prophet is another copycat, just as the 1,000-year reign is another copycat. So it's very, very strange and odd, and without coincidence, I think that everything is trying to be copied. Just as maybe many people think that pyramids and or Babel was a place where possibly there was going to be a portal made to bring back angels to the post-diluvian epoch to rule over them, just as they did in the antediluvian epoch, or perhaps even to procreate and create more giants after the flood. And if you take take Babel as it comes out of Akkadian and their understanding of the Babel event, Babel translates out of Akkadian as Bab for a gate or gateway, and El as in God, so either a stargate or a gateway to the gods or a portal. Seems to be a connection there that they're trying to recreate with their false mountains.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that. I'm going to have to move this button a little closer over here. All right, and so From what I understand is, I mean, the 200 fallen angels in the book of Enoch are totally separate from this council of the gods in Psalms 82. Or would you guys be in agreement with that?
Sorry, had a bit of a glitch there. Didn't quite catch what you said.
The 200 fallen angels in the book of Enoch and the council of the gods in Psalms 82 are totally different entities, correct?
I would say yes, because the angels who sinned, who kept not their first estate or their place of first authority, depending on the translation you read, were punished. They were sent to Tartarus. That's according to 2 Peter 2:4. The gods addressed in Psalm 82, I believe, are the ones who were placed over the nations after Babel. Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, where God divided the nations after Babel, basically telling the world, if you won't deal with me, you're trying to establish this false or artificial mount of assembly to force your way back into the divine council. You're not going to deal with me from now on. You'll deal with my subordinates. And those were the 70 sons of God, sons of B'nai Elohim, placed over the nations. My belief is that those are the gods being addressed in Psalm 82, where Yahweh says, because you're showing partiality to the wicked, you're going to die like men and fall like any prince.
And that was God's way of pulling back and leaving them to their evil, correct?
They had been, the hope, I think, was that, and of course, God knew what was going to happen before he did it because he's outside of time, but I think the point was to give them the opportunity to choose to do what was right. And when they chose not to, well, God passed sentence on them in Psalm 82. And the clue that is the case is in the end, verse 8, and again, going back to the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, where God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God, which is why that number 70 keeps showing up in other ancient cosmologies. It shows up in ancient Egypt. It shows up with the Canaanites, who believed that their chief god El lived on Mount Hermon with his consort and the 70 sons of El. They were the gods of the nations. Deuteronomy 4, and I forget the specific verse, but in Deuteronomy 4, it's mentioned that God apportioned basically allotted the nations to these entities. But in Psalm 2, the psalmist is calling on God to arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. The sentence has been passed. God will inherit all the nations, and the those rebellious false gods are fighting I don't guess what they call it, a strategic withdrawal. Basically, they're trying to cause as much damage as they can before sentence is ultimately and finally carried out.
So was Bel one of the 70 the gods?
I would say yes.
Okay, that's exactly what I was thinking as well.
Well, and Baal in the Mesopotamian traditions is a very, very high up god, and he may even be considered a Satan-like character as well. But I generally place him a touch lower. But it kind of goes back and forth with some of the occultic languages, because what he does is he does something similar to what God does. Baal is he attacks the Leviathan, and I'm trying to think of whether or not in that version it's called Tiamat or Lotan or Yam, or there's many different names for this Leviathan, right? And he breaks the skull in two and divides it into earth and into heaven as part of the controlling of chaos and creating the earth and the sky. And that same type of God is also, with the same type of story, goes with Marduk and with Ra out of the Egyptian pantheon, and China, that would be Pangu, and Indra in the Vedas, for example. They all tell that sort of similar story. So this is a very high up angel if you draw that comparative. So, and typically at the top of the pantheon, right under the parent god, you have an Anki or a Baal type character or an Osiris. So that's kind of how I look at them.
Yeah, and I would agree. You also see that in the Hurrian culture, which was the north, like toward the Caucasus region. Their main kingdom during the second millennium BC was Mitanni, around the time of the Judges. Their storm god Teshub fought a chaos dragon called Ilyanka. So yeah, it's and then of course in the Greek pantheon you've got Zeus fighting Typhon, the god of chaos. So it is repeated over and over again. But certainly Jesus equated Baal with Satan when he was accused of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, Baal the prince. Jesus said, if Satan casts out demons by the power of himself, his house cannot stand, essentially linking Satan to that figure. And then in the book of Revelation, he equates Satan with Zeus when he addresses the letter to Pergamon and says that I know where you live, in Satan's seat. And of course that was a reference to the altar of Zeus. Zeus being the Greek form of the Semitic storm god Baal, Hadad. So, I'd say that is a pretty positive identification.
Yeah, and then when you go to Freemasonry, they generally use the Egyptian pantheon and allegories, and they look at Osiris as the male god, equivalent with Baal or Zeus or Tammuz, and there's so many of the similar type of names. They're all the same god in all the different pantheons, but what they actually say about Osiris, which I think you could take to the rest of these other gods, was an allegory for Satan, whom they call Lucifer. And so I think you can sort of transpose that through all of the different pantheons around the world because they're essentially the same religion.
The thing I thought was fascinating is in looking at the crossing of the Red Sea and realizing that was a very specific message, and if not an actual confrontation from Yahweh to this storm god entity, this Baal or Hadad, who in that period of history, this would be the 15th century BC, was equated in the Egyptian pantheon with their chaos god Set or Seth, who was also the god of the desert and the god of foreigners. Storm god, so apparently was syncretized with the Semitic storm god. So you had Baal, Set worshipped as a single entity during the period of the sojourn in Egypt, when the Israelites were there from about 1750 BC or thereabouts until about 1450 when they left. Northern Egypt was under the control of a Semitic people called the Hyksos, and that was their chief god. But even after the Hyksos got kicked out around 1550 BC, the Egyptian rulers who ruled in the Nile Delta continued to worship this Baal Set character, which is kind of odd. Ramses the Great was a follower of Baal Set, erected a stele to him called the 400-year stele. And it was only later in Egypt's history, after Egypt had been overrun by Nubians and then Persians and then Assyrians and then Babylonians, that the god of foreigners, Set, was no longer welcome. And that's when he became the bad guy who chopped up Osiris. It's confusing when you start really trying to drill down deeply and identify specific entities with specific characters in these the cosmologies of the ancient world, because while Set was equated with Baal, Set was also equated with Typhon. And because Baal was equated with Zeus, and Zeus fought an epic battle with Typhon, then you've got this entity fighting itself, which doesn't make any sense. But the enemy doesn't care what we believe as long as it's not the one thing that's true. So,
yeah, there's always some inconsistencies in the other pantheons and legends and religions that, if you try and go around and marry them all up, you'll just go crazy.
That way lies madness.
So, yeah, no kidding. And what's also interesting is that, and Roland Sitchin, and Sitchin's a Freemason, and an ancient alien guy, but so I want to be a little bit wary of him. But they both wrote that the followers of Osiris went to Egypt after Babel, and that that is rooted in the followers of Asar, which comes out of Mesopotamia, which again links all of these sort of religions back together as being part of the same type of originating religion, and that, this comes out of that whole sun disk symbolism of Ahura Mazda, which was sort of that originating Zoroastrian religion that also moves over to India with the Aryans in about 2300 BC or so to start the Veda religions, which is, has amazingly similar names for gods. So when we talk about these different pantheons being the same gods with the same, just different vernacular names, you can pretty much take that to the bank, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, David Roll did some really good work in bringing back and showing some more recent evidence that supported the early theories of Flinders Petrie, the William Flinders Petrie. I think William was his first name. Anyway, Petrie was an early Egyptologist who noticed the similarities in the architecture of the earliest Egyptian dynasties, the Zoroastrian dynasty, the first dynasty, second dynasty. Their architecture and their artwork were very, very similar to what was coming out of Mesopotamia at that time. But after World War II, this idea that this invading race from outside established the dynasties, the first pharaohs, instead of native Egyptians, that became very unpopular because it had kind of a master race sort of feel to it that was really uncomfortable for historians. So that kind of got put to the side. But the evidence is what it is, whether you like it or not. So it does appear that the civilization of Sumer is what spread these various religions out from that central area. It all began at Eridu, which was the site of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you have Nimrod staying in Mesopotamia after Babel and setting up the Mesopotamian pantheon, and then you have Mizraim and Ham leaving, and in Freemason records they'll take Hermes with them over to Egypt to start the Egyptian pantheon. You have the two mainstay pantheons in the early post-Diluvian epoch being established that are going to spread these religions around the world. And to me, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing that has been really fascinating about digging into the history is seeing, how closely the evidence fits the biblical narrative. And now scholars, and this is an argument David Roll makes. It's an argument that Timothy Mahoney makes in his excellent film Patterns of Evidence, that mainstream historians and archaeologists reject the biblical narrative because they're saying, no, we have to look for the evidence of, for example, the Hebrews in Egypt only during this very specific window of history. And because they're looking at the wrong time, they're not finding it and saying, okay, well, it must not have happened. And similarly, when we look back at, say, Nimrod, I place Nimrod during the period that historians and archaeologists call the Uruk expansion. Uruk was the center of Nimrod's kingdom. And this was basically most of the 4th millennium BC, from about 4000 BC down to about 3100 BC. So somewhere in there, probably toward the beginning of that period, was, in my opinion, Nimrod's, the period during which Nimrod lived and set up the tower, or tried to, at Babel. But if you look at the Bible and you take the chronology literally from the Old Testament, you can't go back quite that far because you don't have enough room then for Noah and the flood and all of the other patriarchs. If you're starting the world at 4004 BC, you can't put Nimrod at 4000 BC, obviously. But if we set aside that chronology, because there's some evidence that maybe not all of the generations were included in the Bible, and there's also evidence if you talk to really cutting-edge physicists, and I barely get my head around this, that maybe what we perceive as time today is not the same as what they perceived as time then. And that chronological time, as we experience it, was not equated or synced with solar time. In other words, revolutions around the sun in the same way as it was back then. I don't know. Like I said, I barely even understand what I just said. So the point is, if we set aside the specific years and say we have to look for Nimrod only within this 200-year window and ignore the fact that there's evidence in the form of surviving poems from ancient Sumer, we can convince ourselves that things that are documented in the archaeological record really never happened, in spite of evidence.
Well, and the other thing is that, as they document things coming out of secular history, there's a lot of disagreement as to how you establish the reigns and then cross them over to the different civilizations, because there's not a ton of information to do that sort of, triangulation at times. And, again, I think, cutting edge researchers and writers like, Dave Grohl, suggest that and make a very good case for a different chronology in a lot of cases, because they're duplicating many of the dynasties because they had more than one name and more than one title.
Right.
And so the accuracy isn't always there on the secular side. It's just that everybody accepts their theories as fact, as opposed to sometimes theory tales, as opposed, more like a fairy tale at times. But I might be being a little bit too hard on them. And they readily do that to dismiss the biblical chronology, and or it's a design thing to discredit biblical chronology, because right from the beginning, when these mystical religions were set up and were being fed information by these fallen angels who become the gods, they are trying to do a number of things. And what they're trying to do with their science and the history and the seven sacred sciences is, to lead people away from God and to discredit God for everything, and to dismiss God and to slander God. So it makes sense that history through seculars is going to be doing those four principles that they've always done from the beginning, and also designed to honor the pantheon of the gods. So again, I tend to use a lot of secular dates when I do my research, understanding that they're not always lining up with the biblical date, but that doesn't mean I am 100% convinced that science isn't just projecting another theory or a misdirection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things that I have noticed, like I said, working on this film and doing a lot of this research, when I started looking into Nicholas Roerich, him and Helena Blavatsky both, I come to find out the entity that these two were channeling was the same entity, El Mariah. Have you guys heard of that?
Well, there are key sets of these demons or fallen angels, whomever that they're challenging, and there doesn't seem to be an endless number of these ones. So it wouldn't surprise me that they're channeling the same names. And certainly Helen Blavatsky names a couple of her spirit guides that she's channeling. And I haven't seen too much repetition of the names, but it would not surprise me that because they're all driving for the same goal, that it would be the same entities that they're talking to. But if you talk to whether or not it's the adepts of Buddhism today and over in Tibet, they're talking to the celestial masters. If you talk to or read about what the Rosicrucians do at their higher levels, they are talking to the Great White Brotherhood and the Celestial Brotherhood that apparently is running all the things and still giving them information. It's a constant in all of these religions. Whether or not they're the same individuals, one probably presumes they are. But I can't say I have explicit information that says that they're the same two or three or the same half dozen or the same 70, whatever that number is.
Yeah, also when y'all were talking about the Vedas earlier, that was another thing that came up in the research, was that that was one of the main things that the Nazis were seeking out, was the Vedas. and they used that to locate the opening down there in Antarctica, the New Schwabensland area.
And isn't it interesting that that part of the world has become so important to this mythology? I'm doing some research now on why that is, and of course, you guys have done a lot of research on that for the forthcoming film. But you just look at pop culture over the last 50 years, and some of the most popular science fiction films have featured that idea that something buried in Antarctica hides a secret from beyond the stars. The Thing with Kurt Russell. The X-Files movie, Mulder has to go to Antarctica to save Scully from the alien experiment that's taking place down there. The Alien versus Predator film, which features a pyramid down there at Antarctica. And it seems like not a week goes by anymore where one of those British newspapers that seem to love that clickbait put out another, UFO researcher story who's found something mysterious, poking through the ice and snow in Antarctica. It all goes back to the work of Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, frankly, and ironically, the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, who professed to be an atheist and may well have been, but he was certainly channeling information from somewhere.
Yeah, and again, these all have sort of the same sort of root source because, again, Derek was talking about, and if I heard you correctly, about Gog and Magog and being up in sort of the northwest Turkey area, which is the Scythian area, and a special mountain that's up there. Well, that's where the Aryans come from. And out of Tartarus, as they say that they escaped from, and in the mythologies that sort of go along with them. And these are the same ones, and you mentioned the Mitanni dynasty. It's the Aryan Marianu that start the Mitanni dynasty, which is one of the powerful dynasties of Nephilim in the post-Diluvian epoch, and they have gods in there like Indra and Mithra and Varuna, because it's the Aryans that are going to take that religion to the Vedas in about, I think, 2300 BC, if my memory serves me right, and they're called the noble ones, the pure ones, the enlightened ones, and so when you think about all of that, you understand that it makes sense that that information would be starting to come to the West from Eastern mysticism and be made aware and start this mythos again about something in Antarctica. Because, again, there's a lot of speculation in the occult circles that Antarctica is actually the continent of Atlantis, that somehow during one of the catastrophes, the Earth crust slips and it slides down to the bottom of the Earth. Whether or not that's true or not, that's just sort of going down a path of some of their legends. But it goes to that idea that there is something being hidden, something kept secret, something that's going to be revealed at a certain point in time when the people are ready for this knowledge, that I think is going to be part of that great deception and delusion of the end time. So you see all of it coming full circle, and it's why it's just sort of swished around and around and around in all the entertainment, in all of the ancient sort of classical writings that come down through history that mysteriously are kept alive and are all polytheist, and that it matches up again perfectly with what we know about sort of prophecy and what's likely coming to in our direction.
Yeah, and Chad, I have to admit, when you and Justin and Wes contacted us here at Skywatch TV to talk with Tom and with Steve, Josh Peck, and then myself, about the Hollow Earth idea, I thought, well, this is really fringe. This is we're off the edge of the map here. But when I started thinking about it and realized that this is what motivated the Nazis to do what they did, the belief in a hollow earth was a central tenet of their faith, and then backing up to the Bible and looking at what the Bible has to say about the abyss and the importance of, and this repeated theme that you see. It's not, one of the major themes of the book, but it's there often enough that you get the idea that Yeah, God included this for a reason here. From Genesis 1, verse 2 to Revelation 21, there are references to the deep, the abyss, the sea, the ocean as the place from which chaos emerges. It's not a coincidence that the seven-headed, ten-horned dragon of Revelation comes out of the sea. Revelation 21, after God passes judgment, executes judgment on the host of heaven and all the rebellious earth, that the sea is no more. And it begins at Genesis 1, verse 2, where the Spirit is hovering over the face of the waters and the deep, the abyss. There is something to this idea that there is something below the surface that is sinister and that opposes the order that God created for us in which to live. But Gary, you said something I want to back up to because this is really interesting. I was doing a little reading on this the other day. You mentioned the Mariano, which for listeners is the ruling caste of the Aryan Hurrian people who founded the kingdom of Mitanni back in the second millennium BC. The Mariano kind of spread out from the kingdom of Mitanni, and the Holy Land, Israel, or Canaan at the time, but what became Israel, was sort of the buffer zone between Egypt, which was still powerful at that time, and Mitanni. But we find in history and also in the Bible key figures whose names have been preserved through the ages who had Hurrian names and may have been members of this ruling class, this Mariano class, who were ruling places in the Holy Land. In fact, one of the two rulers of the area around Mount Hermon that we know from the Egyptian Amarna letters had a Hurrian name. And it's been argued that the king of Jerusalem, the Jebusite king of Jerusalem at the time that David took that city, had a Hurrian name. So interesting that they were showing up at key points in this spiritual war because, again, of the influence, the importance of Mount Hermon, not only as the site where the Watchers descended, but also as what the ancient Mesopotamians, during the Old Babylonian period, there was a copy of the Gilgamesh epic that was recorded on a clay tablet, and it was mentioned in passing in that copy of the Gilgamesh epic that Hermon was the secret dwelling of the Anunnaki. Mount Hermon was considered the home of the gods, or mountain of the gods. In fact, it's even mentioned that way in Psalm 68, although most English Bibles call it, O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan. But the Hebrew, Har Elohim, Elohim can be singular or plural depending on the context. And because we know that Mount Hermon was not the mountain of God, Mount Zion is the mountain of God. A more accurate translation of that verse in Psalm 68 is, O mountain of the gods, mountain of Bashan. And again, during the Amarna period, which would be the time of the judges, 14th century BC or thereabouts, one of the rulers of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, presumably this would be after Joshua and the Hebrews took out Og, was identified as a, not going to pronounce it right, Burad Shawa or something, but scholars believe it was a Hurrian name. So again, you've got these Aryans who, as you said, Gary, worship these gods who show up later in the Indian pantheon, in the middle of the Holy Land, right at the period of time when God was leading the Hebrews into Canaan and setting them up as the inheritors of the land that God set apart for his chosen people.
I was also, noting that the Mitanni are also connected to, in my mind, when you're talking about Hurrian, that they are definitely connected and part of that society. And there's a few different sort of nations that are set up, but Hurrian and Horite are considered to be probably the same type of people. And these are, again, a mysterious Nephilim people in the land of Seir that's also likely is who the descendants of Esau married into, because Seir is a Horite, and these are hairy cave-dwelling giants. Again, hairy is pretty normal for a Nephilim description. And so again, they just reach right down through our history, biblical and otherwise, in ways that people haven't really sort of thought about before.
Yeah, and there's another connection. The Hurrians, and I did need to do more research on this to be absolutely certain of my facts here, but again, just kind of a working theory as I'm piecing things together. This is why I enjoy talking with you, Gary, because this thing starts sparking. It's like, oh, wait, and that connects to the Hurrians spoke what scholars call a Hurro-Urartian language, the kingdom of Urartu, which is probably the kingdom of Ararat, the area around modern Armenia where Noah landed the ark in the mountains of Ararat. That is the same area where Abraham came from. I know most of us have been taught that Abraham came from southeastern Iraq and the city of Ur, but prior to the discovery of that city in the 1920s by the famed explorer Sir Leonard Woolley, most people looking at the rest of the evidence in the Bible placed Abraham in southern Turkey, northern Syria, around the modern city of Sanliurfa in Turkey, southern Turkey. And there was a scholar by the name of Cyrus H. Gordon, 1958, wrote a paper called Abraham and the Merchants of Ura, URA, and placed Abraham pretty definitely in that part of the world as his point of origin. Ura, not found yet, but close to the city of Haran, where they stopped before they continued on to Canaan. If you actually look at a map and look at the trails, the caravan trails that existed back during the time of Abraham, going from Ur in southeastern Iraq to Canaan by way of Haran in northern Mesopotamia is like going from Nashville to Kansas City by way of Minneapolis. You just wouldn't do it. But there were a people who were related to the later Urartians, or the kingdom of Urartu, living in that area and north of there, who were called the Chaldees. These are documented from other extra-biblical sources. So most people thought, well, okay, southeast Iraq must have meant the Chaldeans. Well, no, there were people called the Chaldees who lived north of in between, say, the city of Haran and where you'd find Armenia today. And their chief god was a storm god, incidentally, and that storm god's name was Chaldee. So I think that's where Abraham came from. He came from Ur of the Chaldees, or Ura of the Chaldees. But Cyrus Gordon says, well, when you translated it from the Hittite to Hebrew, yeah, dropping off that last syllable is something that's documented in other words. So, yeah, you had Abraham essentially coming out of an area that was dominated by these Aryan people, the Hurrians, or the Chaldees in that specific case.
Well, and it's certainly possible because, phonetically speaking, vowels were always included in the ancient writings as they come out. They're just kind of been, I think they're more of a modern contemporary sort of addition. That's why you basically have a lot of languages that are written in the old ways that are basically just consonants. So,
right.
So when you're trying to recreate those words coming out of prehistory, it's easy to have a vowel added or one deleted. And then when somebody else comes along and reads that, then they take that in a different direction, which is one of the difficulties of doing really good research on prehistory. But the more you dig into it, you can connect dots like what you're doing, Derek. It starts to make a whole bunch more sense that that's likely where Abraham came from.
Yeah, and according to Gordon, based on some texts that have been deciphered from around the 16th century BC, during the time of the kingdom of Ugarit, that this city of Ura was known as a place where a lot of traveling merchants originated. Well, basically that's what Abraham was. You go from place to place, you sell, you trade livestock and whatever. So yeah, it fits better than trying to picture Abraham as a city dweller, which is what the Sumerians were down in southeast Iraq. They were city dwellers who looked at people like Abraham as uncouth, uncivilized savages, ate raw meat. They were, smelled bad, and they didn't want them around. Abraham fits the milieu, the culture of northern Syria, southern Turkey in the 20th century BC, when he originated there. And again, just to draw another connection, another important people group, more important than what we've been taught through the biblical narrative, and I think for their influence both on history and on the spiritual history of the world, are the Amorites. And the Amorites pretty much dominated all of the Fertile Crescent, including by the time of the sojourn in Egypt. They ruled northern Egypt as well as the Hyksos. The Amorites were in control of basically everything from Babylon to northern Syria, or there was a kingdom there based at Aleppo, and then down through what is today Lebanon and Israel, all under the control of Amorites. But the book I'm working on for next spring will dig deeper into their pantheon, their cosmology, and why I believe it has reached its fullest fruition in modern Islam.
Now, the Amorites, the last descendants that we know of on record of them was the Phoenicians, correct?
Yeah, the Amorites were essentially the ancestors of what we call the Canaanites. The Phoenicians, were essentially the people who succeeded or followed the Canaanites on the coast. You could also, scholars believe that the Arameans were also the descendants of the Amorites. Where the Chaldeans come from, the ones who set up the later Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar, they may have been a tribe of Arameans, so descended from the Amorites. That's my thought right now, but I've not found scholars in any agreement on that. But the Amorites were essentially the progenitors of the later Arameans, Canaanites, and Phoenicians.
Interesting. Have you guys, are either of you guys familiar with Darren Kuyu up in Turkey?
Nope.
No.
It's basically it's a gigantic underground city that they recently, I think they rediscovered it back in the 1960s, or it could have been back in the 1930s. I'm not exactly sure, but it's basically a 7-level underground city that 5,000 people could live underground quite comfortably, and it's right there in the Turkey area. Cappadocia.
Okay, that's not Global Techie you're talking about, is it?
No.
Okay.
The one you're talking about was the one that they just recently discovered that was completely buried, and they said that city was deliberately buried.
Yeah,
but
seemingly Petra. What we see of Petra is just the superficial top level, and it's got the major part of Petra is actually underground as well. So. I'm not sure where you're going with it, Chad, but there's certainly a lot of archaeology I think that's not all that well known that suggests that there was some significant underground cities that were built. And again, what I find significant about that, if you take the Horites who are associated with the Hurrians, and you take that back to Korai, they're actually cave dwellers, right? And is that what they're talking about? Is that Nephilim were builders of great underground cities? I'm just speculating and connecting some dots, but it's just interesting.
No, you're right. You're dead on, and that's the thing is that what was it? National Geographic just recently put out an article within the last week that said that 80% of Petra is still underground. It hasn't even, and that's one of the things I love about Timothy Alberino and Steve Quell. A lot of their research is that that's one of the things that they talk about quite extensively is that a lot of these places that you go to, whether it's down in Peru or Middle East or, even here in America, it's like, these places are amazing, but that's the thing is you're only seeing like the very top 5-10%. And when you get down underneath the ground, and that's the thing, another interesting point that they both brought up is that they believe that a lot of these antediluvian sites, these megalithic sites, they believe that they are actually built on top of pre-Adamic sites. And, y'all were talking about the chronology and everything being off. I mean, that was one of the things that Blavatsky talked quite a bit about was the root races. You were talking about the Aryans. Well, the very first root race that she talks about is like these spiritual beings. That's what she referred to them as, was spiritual beings. And I mean, if you get into like the pre-Adamic, the gap theory and all that, I mean, that right there, that answers a lot of questions that people have.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I don't think we'll know the answers to all of this stuff until we have the opportunity to ask the Lord directly after he comes back. But there are things that we discover that make more sense if you allow for the possibility of the supernatural realm, things for which the natural sciences can't always explain. I mean, sometimes these explanations with the ancient aliens guys will say, well, we can't move a block this size today with the equipment we have, so I'm not saying it's aliens, but it must be aliens. Well, yeah, except that in the 18th century, Catherine the Great moved a stone bigger than any of the stones in the Trilithon at Baalbek without even using animal power. And this is the Thunderstone for the base of the statue of Peter the Great was moved quite a distance. And again, it was all human power. But, they were able to do it by freezing the ground and using, ball bearings essentially underneath the stone to move it. So, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a supernatural explanation. But when you're dealing with things like, head shaping or the similarities between religious practices or, the similarities between pyramids found all over the planet, you have to then begin to wonder whether there isn't an outside influence affecting the decision of primitive man to do these things, and again, using the dating system, the chronology of secular scholars, who wakes up in 7,000 BC and decides, hey, let's wrap Junior's head so tightly that it makes it pointy. We could invent writing today. No, let's see if we can perfect the technique of, wrapping Junior's head into a point. Because apparently, this was something I hadn't expected to find just looking at the history of the prehistoric world, the pre-flood world, really, is that in the ancient Near East, what we consider today Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, it was universally practiced. Everybody apparently had a pointy head. At Eridu, where they found the earliest level of the temple, as they excavated that site back in 48, 49, the team led by the Iraqi Ministry of Antiquities found 206 sets of human remains, and all 206 had deformed skulls. And they all date back, they said, to about 5,400 BC, somewhere in that range. So again, why were they all doing it?
Exactly. Now, yeah, they were trying to emulate something that they had seen, and that was the thing. Is
you would think so. At least that's a possibility. I mean, because this happened for such a long period of time, and they found deformed skulls with human remains all over the ancient Levant, all over the ancient world, from northwestern Iran to southern Turkey to ancient Jericho, all over. And it was, like I said, it wasn't limited to one class within the society. They couldn't even identify the structures within society going that far back anyway. But it wasn't like only a few people who were obviously set apart. It was like everybody. And it was like everybody for like 6,000 years.
And that's the thing, is that, some of these elongated skulls that are out there, I mean, that's the thing, is if you look at them and compare them to normal skulls, the suture is not even there. I mean, it doesn't have the suture, plus not to mention the brain capacity. If you were, I think...
I don't know that is exact. I don't know that that's true for these skulls that have been found in the ancient Near East.
Yeah,
and frankly,
there's two kinds.
Frankly, in a lot of cases, it's because these were found so far back that they don't exist anymore. They can't get to them anymore. And the scholars who found them weren't looking for that or didn't want to go there. And so just, mentioned, oh, well, this was probably due to earth pressure after burial.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It sounds like it's almost connected to their search for the wisdom and for the power that they thought that it would gain.
There's a couple things going on. I mean, first of all, just so that people understand out there, there's obviously ones where people have bound heads to emulate something, and I would suggest emulate their demigods, which would have been the giants and the Nephilim, because they were a serpentine-looking figure that had these elongated skulls. But the thing is with the human ones, is what you can't do with that by binding is create a bigger cranial capacity.
Right,
so you
true.
have the second kind that that Chad is talking about, and a lot of them don't have the normal human suture, and that's probably, and most people conclude, are from the giants. And then the second thing is that there is, in the occult side, is that they were doing this pressure on the brain to manipulate the brain to increase their mental faculties, whether that's true or not, or actually it worked. So you have this idea of emulating their demigods and probably their gods, because the gods had that serpentine look in a lot of cases as well as perhaps trying to distinguish themselves as a priest class or a noble class above the regular mundane. So I think all of this is all going on, but it goes to the root of these polytheist societies that have these demigods that aren't fully human, and you've got these gods that go back to seraphim angels.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And again, all I'm saying, without trying to make any specific or definite statements about what these ancient skulls, and again, we're talking pre-flood, 4000 BC and before, earlier, because we just don't know for sure. We don't have the evidence at hand, and many of the scholars who were looking at this, looking at human remains from that period of history, either don't want to go there because it's considered too fringe to safely protect your PhD or your status or your tenure with the university or whatever. But the scholars who have written about it over the last couple of decades have said, there really isn't much research on this, and here's what we can find. But
that's because they don't get funded afterwards.
Exactly.
Talk about it, and they actually have a word for these types of discoveries, and they call it ooparts. It's out of place artifacts, and then they just get shoved aside because nobody wants to deal with them because it doesn't fit the manipulated, sort of contrived history that they're very, very slow to change.
The accepted history, right?
Yeah.
That or anything that points back to the Bible. That's one of the things that they will definitely bury.
Right.
And in fact, I really enjoyed the recent thing where, what was it? Tom Horn had uncovered the thing about the Smithsonian that their founder. You want to talk about that real quick, Derek?
Well, to be honest with you, I've been kind of tied up in my own research here, so I'm not intimately familiar with that. But I know that they have found some things regarding the human remains that were dug up by, white farmers as whites began settling the United States after the post-colonial period in the 19th century, as whites moved westward gradually and began turning over the soil. They were turning up sets of remains that were larger than average, and many of those were scooped up and taken off to Washington, D.C. to the Smithsonian. But as far as the specifics, to be honest, I haven't had time to read Tom's articles. I've got them flagged to read because it's going to be a fascinating read. But no, you'd have to ask Tom about that.
Yeah, he basically they had uncovered that everything that they were saying about their founder was completely false. And I think I tagged.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about him then. I don't know what Tom wrote, but Smithson was one of the youngest members to join the Royal Society. He was educated at Oxford, and so right out of university, he becomes part of the Royal Society. He's also a Freemason. And so when he leaves this money, it's going to be taken over to be brought over by a couple of American presidents who are both Freemasons. And so this whole thing is answerable and funded back to the Royal Society. So if people think that this is an organization that is embedded in a vacuum of secular objectivity, it's rooted in mysticism, because the Royal Society is set up by Freemasons and Rosicrucians to do those four principles that I was talking about earlier, is to lead people away from God, and to discredit God for everything, and to slander God, and to honor the pantheon of gods. So why anybody would think that the Smithsonian would give us an objective perspective and coincidentally lose somehow every part and anything that suggests otherwise that ever goes back to them, is just not a surprise.
Yeah, especially, like I said, all the skeletons and all that. I mean, they found a 18-foot skeleton here in Seymour, Texas, which is right down close to San Antonio. And then we got the rock wall over here in Rockwall, Texas, which is literally 10 minutes down the road from me. That, basically they were pulling out artifacts. They were trying to say, well, this is, who was it? Scott Wolf or whatever on America Unearthed, the History Channel, was trying to say that this was all a naturally occurring geological thing. Well, first of all, this guy's not even a geologist, okay? If you really want to get me started, the guy's not even a geologist. He says he has an honorary degree from some college. Well, they've gone and looked into that. That college has never, ever given out any kind of honorary degrees, period. And so, I mean, his whole argument is all nonsense. And, not only were they pulling out artifacts, they pulled out a skull to an 18-foot giant out of there as well. In fact, part of the wall used to be completely unearthed. Well, they eventually filled that in with what they call Lake Ray Hubbard now. Part of the wall is actually under the lake. That was the only way they could hide it, was to fill it in with the lake. And not only that, but 150 miles away from here, there's another place called Milano, Texas, where there's another wall that they said is even bigger than the Great Wall of China, and it's buried underneath, under the ground.
Yeah, and it should also be noted that people should have a look at the Smithsonian logo. It's that creepy sun-worshipping logo, and it's a very similar logo to that of the Jesuits. Again, no coincidences there. So, yeah, we're not going to get any real truth out of that organization, but maybe I'm being a little tough on them.
No, I think you're being dead on right there, because, like I said, that's. I mean, long before the Smithsonian came along, we know that the Vatican was going all over the place, and that they were carrying a lot of this stuff off. I know that what was it, True Legends Volume 1. One of the things that Timothy unveiled when he went down to South America, down in Peru, was he actually found documents from the Spanish Catholic when they first came over, and it talked about that they found caves with these elongated giant skeletons that were almost 27 feet tall, that were literally sitting on thrones and adorned with all sorts of jewelry, and that they were worshiping them. They had been committing sacrifices in these caves for hundreds and hundreds of years. And, of course, that's the thing, is they carted those skeletons off, that we'll never see those ever again.
And again, it's this cave thing and this subterranean thing that sort of keeps sort of resurging all of the time. And I know you'll appreciate this, Chad. I mean, just think of the Temple of Pan over in the Bashan area, where Jesus went to preached and announced Peter to be the rock of the church. I mean, that was over a cave that was thought to lead to the underworld, right? And was known as the Rock of the Gods. I mean, this whole idea of underworld and gods is another one of these consistencies that just don't seem to go away. And it doesn't matter seemingly where you go around the world. Like you have the Nagas that were, again, this serpentine type race that were considered the gods and symbolized the netherworld and the underworld. And again, you have this serpentine imagery coming back, and you have these Naga priests, which are very similar to the Sabeti or the Shebtiu and the Knuckles and all the different seven sages, the rishis out of India, all telling a very similar story, but also doing these unusual cities and things that have subterranean aspects to them, or that go deep into mountains. It's very, very strange and interesting. And if you leave it just as coincidence and don't make the connections, I think we lose the story. And I think we need to dig further into as to why they were building these types of facilities.
Yeah, and the Nagas, I mean, that's some amazing stuff when you start getting into all that. I know that you've recently been doing a lot of research into the dragons over there in India and China. You want to talk a little bit about that, Gary?
Sure, we can. And as we talked about, is that it's the Aryans that are going to carry this belief system and this religion into India, and they're going to found Jainism and Hinduism, which becomes Buddhism, and then the Chinese religion goes back to the Indian religion and is actually centered on that. And this whole idea of the dragons go back to, and the dragon creators go back to the belief system of the Nagas and that pantheon that they believe in. And just as that's the same pantheon that is exported down the road over to Japan and floods all of Southeast Asia. And that's why you have this consistency of these dragons and these consistency of the Nagas. And Knuckles were the same thing over in the Quiché Maya as they're recorded over there. So, and these Nagas were, and there's two sets of Nagas, just as there's two sets of the Sabeti or the Apakol. Oh, I can't get that word out right now. We were talking about it earlier in the show. Apkalu, yeah, they're the same types of beings where you have 7 major angels, as similar to what Enoch will talk about the book of, that is giving all of this information to civilize the civilizations around the world, whether it's writing and other knowledge, agricultural stuff, all the stuff that you need to build a civilization. And they also create a priesthood, and a priesthood of Nagas in some parts of India, or the Brahmins, as the name comes out of the Aryans, and they're all going to have the same name. So whether or not you're talking about the followers of Horus, or the companions of Horus, or the Knuckles, or the Nagas, or the Tengu, these are all the same type of snake brotherhoods, and there's 2 classes. There is a god class, like a god like the Thoth god, wisdom god of Egypt, which is part of that companions of Horus organization of religion and developing of the knowledge. And you have the male one, or the priests that follow after, and they all have a tradition of these rishis and nagas somehow surviving, and generally there's 7 of them that survive the flood narrative in these occult and polytheist religions to carry this antediluvian knowledge forward to civilize the earth afterwards. Just an amazing amount of commonality. And these Nagas, as being the god ones, as opposed to the demigods, priests, or just human priests, they were considered wise beings from heaven. Okay, they were also considered to be shapeshifters, and they can also take human form. They were lords of the underworld, again, as what I mentioned earlier. And a Naga, best represented and transliterated down, is the cobra. And so you have Naga going back to a specific type of snake, as opposed to Sarpa, which would be snakes in general. So the Nagas were this cobra type look. And again, we have this cobra type look in the Egyptian pantheon. And the pharaohs, the headdress that they would wear would represent sort of those wings, not wings, but that dressing around a cobra's head. Mm-hmm. And again, I just don't find that this is coincidental, because when we get over to, let's say, the Quiché Maya and Central American and North American cultures, we have these gods that are the feathered and the plumed serpents, and we have the thunderbird gods. And so what we have is sort of this serpent imagery of these gods with wings and with feathers, and I think they're talking about all of the same. But what's really kind of unique, as with the Anunnaki, is that there's also these bird-like beings, which are more akin to the Tengu out of Japan and out of China. So there seems to be a couple variations, or they just have this changeling sort of capability. But again, it all goes back to the same seraphim type of powerful gods that were around in the antediluvian epoch. And they all spawned both the priest class, as in the Brahmins in India, and or in Taoism as it comes out of the Chinese, and a military and noble class of rulers. Again, this is very common, and if you look at any of the infrastructure around the world of the dynasties, they have the god that they worship up top, the pantheon of gods. They have their representative, the divine representative pharaoh or king or emperor, and then they have this organizational structure of mysticism, that's the religion, and the developing of magic and the occult and the sciences. And that goes all the way back into prehistory. And if you understand that when we're talking about prehistory and they're talking about wizards as being the priest class, you understand where that allegory fits in on some of the fairy tales and the entertainment where it comes down. Just as the magi, where magic comes from, are an extension of the priest class and the name that they accept for what they're developing in terms of the sciences with Nimrod after Babel. That was a rant. Sorry.
No, absolutely. It was fascinating stuff.
I just realized I was going on for a very long period of time, and maybe I should let some people in here. And
You can keep going. It's fascinating.
Was there any areas in there that you wanted me to cover off a little bit more in detail, or?
Oh, I mean, you go wherever you want to go with this. I mean, that's the thing is that I know you've done a lot of research into the whole thing about the dragons and the connections there between all the different dots and stuff.
Yeah, because again, the if you get into the creation gods of most of these well, let's just say all of them for sake of simplicity, is that these are serpent gods and or dragon gods that are involved in polytheist creationism. And in there you have the various Leviathans and Rahabs and Yams and Tiamets of the world. They're all talking about the same type of god. Just as you get into the Asgard and Norse mythology. I mean, again, they have the same type of Leviathan, and they call it Midgardamar, and that's where when that animal is destroyed and is separated, as in all of the stories that we talked about earlier, that's where Middle Earth comes from. So when I talk about that, these fairy tales are telling this history of polytheism, you just have to understand the language that they're talking about. And what's also interesting as we go a little bit deeper in it is that as you get into, let's say, Cambodia, and again, they have the same understanding of the Nagas, and they look at them as reptilian beings who at one time possessed an empire in the Pacific Ocean, ruled over by King Kaluya. But at some point in time, that was destroyed, and they settled in India, where the Cambodians eventually get their religion from. And again, that goes back to that antediluvian sort of epoch and the flood and the cataclysmic changes and how many different types of civilizations were there? Was there one, or was there as many as 9, as what occultism will talk about? And so the 7-headed Nagas that are depicted at Angkor Wat represent, in their belief system, 7 different races of these Nagas. So 7 different kinds of them. So they're suggesting there are some different kinds of these Nagas, whatever that means. I have not discovered what that means, but you just can't seem to go anywhere in the world and not see this seraphim, serpentine angel with wings imagery that's part of the gods, just as you have the gods being depicted as serpents in Mesopotamia, and in a lot of cases, even the ones on Mount Olympus were originally depicted as serpents. And that makes sense too, because Enki is considered the wisdom god and the serpent god, right?
Fascinating stuff. The thing that is really intriguing is when you look at some of the old iconography of the Sumerian god Ninurta, who was the warrior god, son of Enlil, who was kind of filled the same role in that pantheon as Baal or Hadad later in the Canaanite pantheon. You had the older god, the elder god, who was the king of the gods or the creator god, and then the younger, more energetic, warlike god who came in and took over as sort of the vice regent, if you will. Ninurta fighting a seven-headed dragon on a Sumerian inscription from the, I think, about 2300, 2400 BC. So when you compare that with the prophecy of the seven-headed beast coming out of the sea, the abyss, in the book of Revelation, you've got connections there that, again, are just beyond coincidental.
Yeah.
I hate to break early from a party, but I'm getting some emails here. There are some things that I have to attend to at work here pretty quickly, so I'm going to need to jump off the call. I apologize for having to do that, but there are some things that need to be attended to rather urgently here on this side that came up unexpectedly here.
Well, it's no problem, Derek. We appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. Always fascinating, and you're always welcome to come back.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm sorry to cut early because I'm enjoying this conversation immensely. It's always fun. And Chad and Kay, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Sorry to have to cut out early, but like I said, some things have popped up here while we've been talking that I need to get on pretty quick.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Derek. You have a great day, sir.
Yes. God bless you.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Derek. Always fun when you're on. We get to start banging off different things that we need to dig into deeper all the time. It's amazing.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to getting past a couple of projects here where my schedule frees up a bit, have you back on View from the Bunker.
Oh, that would be awesome.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
All right.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All righty.
I want to take a moment to say something. I know that I'm being rather quiet during this interview, and this is a learning experience for me because there are so many things that are being said that are totally new, and I'm soaking all of it in, and I'm hoping that the audience that's listening is coming to this interview approaching it pretty much the same way I am. I wish I was asking more questions, but as I'm coming up with them, you're answering them, Gary, and Derek was also. So I don't want my quietness to be taken as rudeness. It's just I am very, very engrossed in what is being said.
Well, and that's the whole idea is to get the information out, and it's so wonderful to have a person like Derek on the show who is very, very familiar with Mesopotamian history and other history to be able to build on these things and put it together with more details that sort of make sense for the people. Because a lot of times at the shows you get a superficial aspect, but not enough information to properly connect those dots. And I'm always a fan of trying to give a little bit more information so that people know that we're just not winging this and we're just not making it up as we go.
That's one thing that I really enjoy about doing Deception Detection Radio is that our goal is not to do the surface, but to actually get into the core, the meat of what it's all about. And we're always assured of that with you and with Derek also. So I just wanted you to know I wasn't trying to be rude. I am just totally enthralled in the conversation. And Chad, as always, you're asking and making just the right questions and statements.
Well, that's one of the things that we like to do on here is we like to give our guests the opportunity to say what they need to say. And we don't want to sit here and ask questions unless a particular question comes up that needs to be asked. We want to give you the chance and opportunity to say exactly what you come on here to say.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that. And, as we were just talking about some of the Chinese and the Indian, and let's include the Japanese. So you have a Li family that's out of the China bloodlines, and you have the Yamamoto bloodline coming out of Japan. And I'm still trying to wade through all of the different doorways through the basic bloodlines in India. But it's important to understand this, how it happened in prehistory, because it all has a relevance for prophecy. So that when we talk about the metallic empire that Daniel is talking about in the end time, that, the descendants of these empires are going to not only mix with the offspring of humans, so it's going to be iron and clay, with clay being, I think, representing the humans and the metals representing the dynasties, but there's also kings from around the world. Like we have a 10-nation empire, and they're referred to as the kings of the East in the Revelation. And I think we need to understand that there's not just Western families and bloodlines that are going to make up these kings. This is going to be a worldwide empire represented by all of these ancient bloodlines that are still existing, and perhaps some human bloodlines as well.
Yes, and also you have the, like I said, with a lot of the research that we've been doing on the film, I know you've heard of a book called The Coming Race. I know you probably read that. Okay, well, you know exactly where I'm going with this, is that will all tie in with Revelations, end times. And that the whole thing about Abaddon, the bottomless pit, and basically the whole thing about the coming race and the whole, I guess, theosophical beliefs and stuff, like Blavatsky and Crowley and all them, was that they believe that there is a race inside the earth that is going to come back onto the earth, and that they have a master, and that's how they refer to him. They refer to him as the master, that he will come back and that he will rule over the earth.
Yes. Yeah, and they're wanting to have that new Atlantis, that kingdom that was reigning in the antediluvian epoch. That's why Francis Bacon, in his book, The New Atlantis, called it the New Atlantis for the end time. And it'll have the mystical religions with the ruling bloodlines of the Nephilim, or a new Nephilim, because they're always trying to create new Nephilim, and the old gods. And then coming out of the abyss are the fallen angels and these scorpion-like little beasts, right? And what's interesting about those scorpion beasts, again, if you understand what's going on in prehistory, you have some documentation, and particularly in a couple of old Mesopotamian documents about these scorpion gods, and one is the Enuma Elish as one example, and the other one was I think it's out of the it's Dubar tablets that Smith had discovered, and what it's talking about is these scorpion beasts. And they were locusts, and they had the body of a scorpion. I'll give a description. They looked like horses prepared for battle, just as it's talking about in Revelation. And so they had, they're known as Akrab Buamalu and Gerta Bilu. Two different names, different languages, basically what's coming out of, and also part of the Epic of Gilgamesh as well. And they had they're very large beings with the head and the torso and the arms of a man, but the body of a scorpion with avian or bird legs and wings, and they launched powerful destructive weaponry as some sort of arrow from bows, and they also had a stinger in their tail that it was a venomous stinger that they could sting people with. And it is amazing that is an absolute description of the scorpion things that come out with the fallen angels. And what they were actually sort of like a military and a guard associate with the gods, as they were described in these ancient epics. And what's also interesting is that if you take the word scorpion back to Hebrew, as it comes up a few times in the Old Testament, it's actually spelled AQRAB, number 6137, as what a scorpion is. So again, you get this correlation that is coming together about what the end time is going to look like. And all of this stuff that seems so fantastic out of prehistory is going to burst onto the world stage in a very quick manner, and in a way that is going to overwhelm people and deceive them in a way that they could not have imagined, and thus they're going to buy the lie. They're going to believe the lie.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you get a lot of Christians that they that's the biggest thing that they always ask is, why do we need to know this? What's the
Yeah.
importance?
Yeah. And, I know you like to talk about CERN, and I don't know whether we've talked, about where CERN comes from. But, if you do some research into polytheism, you understand there's two gods that are specifically named CERN. One is Cernunnos, which is a Druid god, and its counterpart, which is the same god, which is CERN out of the Etruscan pantheon. And this is a god that is described exactly the same way as the pan god is. And they name this thing after these two gods, after the pan god. And as we've talked about, I'm sure you've talked about many times, is people think that the CERN is trying to find a way to get into the abyss to release Azazel, who the pan god is associated with.
Yeah, and plus, I mean,
it's all hidden in plain sight.
Well, not only that, but look at where CERN is located at. What's smack dab right in the middle of the circle? That's where the Temple of Apollo was, and that's where they believe that the abyss is located directly underneath that. So that's the thing is, it's all done for a reason. It's not just happenstance or just luck or whatever you want to call it. They put that there for a very specific purpose, and it's there in a specific place for a specific reason.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about Apollyon, Apollo is, and there's not very much writing on this, but I mean, most think of Apollo as a sun god, but he's also a god of the underworld as well, and there's a temple that's actually dedicated to Apollyon, which was his other name, and he was known there as the Greek god of death and pestilence, as well as the sun god.
Yeah. So I mean, it all ties in. It's all, that's the thing is when you have the right pieces to put together, it makes a much clearer image, and you can actually see that this is all interconnected. And that's the thing is we don't talk about this stuff for people to be fearful or anything like that. We like to discuss this because we want people to be prepared, not just in a physical sense, but mentally as well. That's the thing is that if you are mentally prepared for what is coming and the tribulation and all that, then you will be able to deal with it when it arrives.
Gary, that you and Chad were just speaking about knowing what happened in the past to be prepared for the future. Well, we're told in the Bible that there's nothing new under the sun. So everything that has happened will happen. So it's very important that we take heed of everything. I mean, it wasn't just put in the Bible to be taking up space. It has a definite meaning.
I agree. And then you put that alongside with what Jesus said about signs for the end times, that it's going to be like the days of Noah, and nothing new is under the sun. Then it's more than just people were getting buried and before the end came. It's the whole ideology of what happened before the flood and what's been going on over and over and over. Babel was just another rebellion, just as the end time is going to be the final rebellion. This has happened over and over and over throughout our history.
It's really fascinating when you take a look at it like that, and you know that what you're reading is going to come around again.
Yeah, exactly. And if we are prepared, we can alert other people. And even if they're not ready to accept it, the seed's been planted, and then they'll have to make a choice at that time. But at least they'll have a chance to make the right decision.
Exactly.
And I mean, I've even had. I mean, it breaks my heart to say this, but I've even had a family member tell me that if the end times came, that they would take the mark of the beast and let their daughter take the mark of the beast because they wouldn't want anything to happen to them. And that literally shattered my heart when I heard that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people will make those types of decisions. And also in the face of, do you want to have certain death, persecution, and or torture and imprisonment, or do you want to take the mark and survive and be promised godhood? I mean, that's the stark reality that people are going to have to make. The problem is what's good on the short term is not good on the long term. And if you take that mark, there's no reprieve. It clearly says in the Bible that if you accept that mark, you're going to burn in the lake of fire forever and ever.
Yeah, I'd rather take God's way and suffer for a short while instead of for eternity. At least, I figure if someone wants to send me home early, hey, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at least you'll have, the first death and either be raised into heaven, or you'll have a second death and you won't burn forever. I mean, the first two choices are better, but one would be, saying, let's think about this and let's go with the one who's going to promote us to immortality forever and choose God.
Amen.
But it's going to be a difficult choice because it's not going to seem quite that simple in the heat of battle. And that's why if you always know what you're going to do when before you get into those situations, the decision becomes much easier than trying to make a panic-stricken, hurried decision. Because this will happen very quickly as it all comes to pass.
And we have to prepare ourselves for that. If you go into a situation where you're being persecuted and you know what the enemy is going to do, or you don't know what the enemy is going to do, but you have an idea, you can't make an intelligent, rational decision. But if you run every scenario through your head, and it's almost like training, and you ask God to help you with that, then he's going to give you the strength to get through that. But if you just go into it and you're not aware, you're in major trouble.
Yeah, and if this is the generation, and I think we're in the zone of all of this starting to unfold, then we don't have the easy path. So we'll have a more difficult path, but one presumes with what we're going to do, greater rewards will come of it. But again, I think that's why we're told not to want to look forward to the end times, because it's going to be a very terrible short period of time. But then after that, obviously, it leads into eternity, starting with the 1,000-year millennium and then off into eternity.
Do you find, Gary, that right now you feel a heavy heart, and that there is so much sadness because you know that we've only got a limited time to reach people? And that's what God has us doing, is out there getting his word out and trying to help them to hear God's calling. But I feel like that we're running so short on time that we're not going to be able to reach everyone. And that really weighs heavy on me.
It does. And that's, we can only do what we can do and do it to the best of our ability. But I believe that, again, because I like to go back to what Jesus said, and I have a different take on things at times than other people, particularly on prophecy. I believe that the 144,000 are going to be the ones that are going to preach the Bible to the people in the end time, that Jesus talks about the gospel being preached around the world. And it's only for a short period of time, but I think that's part of trying to get the message out for the people of the end time. So nobody can say that they weren't properly warned in the end time. Because it is going to happen very quickly with a whole bunch of different things that are just going to overwhelm people. So,
what do you see right now, Gary, that stands out the most to you, that is that you can actually have that direct link between now and what is said in the Bible in Revelation? Is there one key thing that stands out to you?
In terms of what's coming together that suggests that we're going to be in the end time?
Yes, like there's
Yeah.
the wars and rumors of wars. I mean, we're seeing that now, but there's a lot. Is there anything in particular that stands out?
Yeah, I would suggest two things, and maybe the second thing is actually, two things or three things. So the first thing is that I do believe that we're in the fig tree generation. And so then it gets to be how long is a generation, and what triggers the fig tree generation? Was it Israel becoming a nation in 1947, or was it taking of Jerusalem in 1967? And is a generation 70 years or slightly longer, or estimated around that? Either way, if we're in the fig tree generation, that is the big event. And so things will come when they come. And the second thing would be is as I watch, and it doesn't matter who's in power, is we have this continual march towards global government and being afraid of wiping ourselves from the face of the earth. And there's more and more talk that comes along with that, with religions talking more and trying to find ways to bridge that. So I would say those are the things that have me really thinking that we are where we are as that couples up with the technology that we have in place, which would have to be a great technology based on what I think they had in the antediluvian epoch. So those are the major sort of things that I see that are happening. And even though it seems to be taking a long time to put together, we have to understand that until the restrainer is removed, like the end time can't happen. So everything is preparation, and then things will happen very, very quickly. And I think they'll happen very, very quickly after we hit that trigger with the aid of catastrophes. So does that answer the question that you're talking about, or were you looking for something more specific that I could point towards?
No, you answered it. That was good answers and right on. Thank you.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
And also, when we were talking about CERN a while ago, I know I think it's Ecclesiastes where it says that don't go poking your holes into hedges, or you may be bitten by a serpent. I kind of see that. One of my friends, BDK, recently, one of his podcasts, he had talked about that. He actually interpreted it more as don't go poking your finger into other dimensions, or you may be bitten by a serpent.
Well, probably either or, no doubt about that, I think.
Yeah.
So, well, and this, again, it's that whole ideology of serpents that is very, very important. And one of the things that I always appreciate is how the Bible doesn't work with in coincidence, and how it links things that people don't tend to look for. So, in Luke 10, it talks, Jesus is talking, and he's talking about seeing Satan as he fell from heaven, which is obviously referring to Isaiah 12 about Lucifer as it comes out in the King James Bible. But what he also says is I also give you, power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy. Right? And he's talking about these imageries that we've been talking about the whole show, as he talked about beholding Satan falling from heaven. That is not a coincidence.
No. Not at all.
Chad, did you have any more questions for Gary?
Oh, we could do this all night, but I know Gary's got things to do. He's a busy man, and man, I love your book. Your book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Oh, my goodness. I got to say, if you do not own this book, you need to run out and buy it right now.
That's right. It's great. I recommend it to everyone. It's so good. And I still have it as my Bible companion.
And
I appreciate that.
You said that you're working on a second book, correct?
I am. I need to find more time to work on it, though, because it's not coming along very fast right now. About halfway through, I guess. But
I know
it's not going to be 20 or 30 years.
No. I'd like to put out a few more, so that I got to shorten that time frame down a little bit.
Well, you can tell that you put a lot of time and love into the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Is there anything, Gary, that you wanted to share with everyone tonight that we haven't touched on or brought up?
No, I think, we've given people a lot of information. And again, kind of the point is that if you don't understand prehistory and if you don't understand that the giants were real, as it's talked about in Genesis 6 and as they come up after the flood again, you lose a significant ability to interpret and understand what the Bible is talking about all the way through, and also what's going to happen in the end time. It is one of those sort of decoding secrets that you need to have. It's the right lens to view Israelite history, our history, the history of the world, and what's going to happen in the end time. And without that, you're kind of half blind, and you will be surprised. So learn about this and dig deeper into it. That would be my encouragement for people, because it really is to continue to mix metaphors, the Rosetta Stone to the Bible.
Yeah, he's not joking about that, because it talks about in Isaiah, in the Septuagint version, it says that giants are coming to fulfill my wrath.
Yes. And again, I don't look at that as, and again, not all translations have it quite that way, but it might say mighty ones, or it might say other sort of versions, but they are talking about the same type of entities, or at least the bloodlines, and who knows, maybe full-grown giants. We don't know.
Yeah, and then you got Matthew talking about, says men's hearts failing them for fear for looking at those things coming upon the earth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the thing, is these things are coming back. They were real, and they are going to come back on the earth again.
I agree.
Well, Gary, you have been on Deception Detection. You're still the returning guest that we've had on more than anyone else. And I know that Chad and I are already looking forward to the next time. But for those who haven't heard where they can contact you, order your book, could you please share that with them?
Sure. The first place to either contact me or order my book, you can go to the Genesis6conspiracy.com, Genesis 6 with the number 6. You can get a hold of me through there. I have a generous excerpt of every chapter on that website to give you a good feel for the book. You can also follow me on Gary Wayne on Facebook, and 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages. There's been somebody has set up a Gary Wayne group, Genesis 6 conspiracy, and I'll be posting and commenting in there regularly. And you can also follow me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And if you get a hold of me with a question or a comment you want to come back on, I will get back to you on that. It may take me a day or two, but I will get back to you on that. And as far as ordering the book, you can order signed copies from me off my website. It's also available through BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com and Amazon.ca and around the world, and you can connect to those off my website or go directly to them. It's also available in Kindle form, which you can also connect to off my website. It's also available on all online retailers, and it is available through pretty much any retailer, even if they don't have it on the shelf and you want to support your local bookstore or local Christian bookstore. It's distributed through Bookmasters, so if you tell them Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne through Bookmasters, they can bring it in for you.
And if you don't own it, everyone, it is an investment that will change your life. It will change the way that you look at everything around you and how you view the Bible. So Chad and I highly recommend it. Chad, you said that you would like to say tonight's closing prayer. Could you go ahead and do that for us, please?
Sure. Father, we thank you for this time to come together and to talk about your word and learn and sharpen on one another. I hope that everybody has found this edifying as well as informative. And we ask that you bless the entire audience out there, as well as Gary and Derek and Kay and Justin and BDK and everybody else. We appreciate all that you do for all of us, and we thank you for opening our eyes as well as our hearts. And if anybody has not accepted Jesus as their Savior, we ask that they come to know Him and that they turn their lives over to Jesus and that they make the ultimate decision to serve and follow you. And we pray all these things in Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Again, Gary, thank you very much. Thank you, Chad and Derek. That's going to do it for tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We pray you have a blessed week. Good night, everyone.
Night.
In the sky, gazing far into the night, I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's